All right, shall we call the roll and call to order here?
Mario Ryan. Bart Bartles.
Here.
Todd Rusk.
Here.
Brian Sproul.
Here.
Rachel Valenga. Stephen Wald.
Here.
Ryan Wolber.
All right. Do we have any changes to the agenda this evening? I guess we had a couple of presentations that were not going to happen tonight that are going to get bumped to next week. So we've got...
Next month?
I'm sorry, yes, next month. So I see that Rick Banner is here, and our other two speakers will hear from in May. Is that right?
Yeah, I think they'll both make May, and I don't know if you want to do a change to the agenda for Bart.
Yeah, if you're up for presenting.
I can pinch hit for a bit.
Okay, great. Then we'll hear from Bart. Are there any other changes to the agenda? Okay. Let's move to the minutes from the previous meeting. Let's just get a motion out on the table. Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second? Okay. Is there any discussion or any corrections? Okay. All those in favor of approving the minutes as they're presented signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, those are approved. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak to us tonight? Doesn't look like it. And we'll move to our communications and to the staff report. Scott?
Good evening. I'll start with a late edition. I emailed you all this afternoon, and I printed it for you as well. This report usually comes earlier in the year. We had a delay. Not all haulers submitted their reporting on time, and we actually had our first enforcement for that ordinance. This is the third year that we've had our mandatory reporting ordinance for waste haulers. But we've got it all now, and so I wanted to get this to you as soon as possible. This is the U-Cycle report, and the first page describes in narrative all the contents, but I think the series of charts and graphs display everything you want to know pretty quickly. Curbside U-Cycle collections were slightly down, but it's a fairly insignificant percentage. Multifamily recycling down 11%. Commercial recycling showed a 113% increase. Recall that this is not provided by franchise agreement with the city. This is provided by any number of private haulers, and they report their totals per our ordinance to us. That's how we get that number. So did twice as many businesses recycle or businesses generate twice as much recycling this year? Or did the reporting get better? I can't say, but that's the numbers we have. City facility recycling also showed a dramatic increase. That is due to better reporting and recording of data. So all the materials in terms of, this is not just commodities, so this includes what would be C&D waste. So when we recycle asphalt, we're documenting that so that we're catching all the good work and documenting all the good work that we're doing. Landscape recycling down 2.5%. Again, that's a very small percentage. And then you see the totals. The total landfill went up dramatically, and so that contributes to us losing about 4% on our diversion rate. You can see last year we had a dramatic increase in our diversion rate on the last page, and that graph only shows 3 years. Again, that's because we had a substantial change in how data was collected 3 years ago when we started a new hauler ordinance that required the reporting. So to compare the numbers before would be unhelpful because it would be such a different methodology. Oh, also I should mention Ryan Wolber emailed me earlier today. He's sick today. That's why he's absent. So to the report, and this is also posted on the meeting website if you need it again or need to share it with someone. We currently have 48 buildings registered for the UC Energy Star Challenge. We had set a goal of getting 50 buildings registered, so we're real close to achieving our goal and still have a lot of time left. So pretty happy about that. We're going to start working on our second goal, which is to get 25, so 50% of those buildings, to follow through with a benchmark of their baseline. So that would be their 2013 energy use in their building. Subsequently, we'll be working to get 10 of those buildings to implement energy reductions and document that in their 2014 energy use. And then our final goal is to get 5 new buildings or 5 additional buildings Energy Star certified. I've got a section in here that I haven't had before titled Public Engagement, a couple different activities. I just started putting this in not because I just started public engagement or our division just started public engagement. We've been doing that, just haven't documented it, and we had a particularly active month coming up, so it was top of mind, so I thought I'd put that in there. A couple of different activities going on. Some activities with our sustainable water management plan. We had some goals to save water, conserve water on our landscaping. We're working on, we've been asked to submit a proposal with ISTC, their research grant program. We submitted a pre-proposal, and they accepted that and asked us to submit a full proposal. Essentially what we're doing is looking for seeking funding to buy some materials for irrigation controls. And we want to test out separately from each other. We want to test out the impact of a rain sensor and the impact of a soil moisture sensor. Currently, all of our irrigation systems are either manual or timer, and we want to try out these more advanced controls. There's a wealth of data on the results from these controls from Florida and California, but very little actual measurements from the Midwest. So, the innovative part of our research proposal is that no one's really documented the savings here. And our next meeting would be Tuesday, May 6th, 7 p.m. in council chambers.
All right. Are there any questions or comments for staff?
So, should I be surprised by the big jump in landfill tonnage in this diversion report? I follow and understand there was a methodology change, so data prior to 2011 may not be comparable. But at the same time, our recycling program has a long history, and presumably there's been some kind of a metric. So even if it was historic data, wasn't graphed on the same axis, but would show, has it always been lumpy and spiky like that? Or the memo talks about, maybe it's the economy recovering. Well, is there evidence that that's likely, or is that just
that's a speculation. The total waste landfilled is also hauler reporting, and one of the complexities there is that a particular hauler can drive from the county to Urbana to Champaign, collect waste all in the same truck, and then go to the scale and tip at the transfer station. And so what they're required to do per our ordinance is estimate a proportion of that particular scale total. So there, depending on the practice of the particular folks in the particular businesses, you might see a big change from year to year. We do have more historic use cycle collection data, particularly for curbside recycling, which Urbana was the first to have curbside recycling in the state. So that's something I could pull out for you in the future.
Okay, but you wouldn't recommend, essentially drawing any conclusions necessarily from this year-over-year changes on these, because the data is thrown off by the large lumps in the city facility recycling, and there was an explainable change there, and the total tonnage recycled.
Yeah.
Maybe an unexplainable change, but enough of a change that the data is pretty noisy.
Yeah, I think more than the total diversion rate. I think the individual lines are probably more telling. So like a 3% change is not that much. 11% change is fairly significant, or significant enough. And we haven't had any particular changes in our use cycle program that we can think of. So there may be just a need to be more aggressive in promoting multifamily, ensuring that folks know that they have it at their apartments. We do quite a number of activities every year. We work with one of the U of I events to get a bunch of students to do door hanging at apartments, because we have all these people coming in that have never lived in Urbana before. So we always do that. But there may be more opportunities, and we may have to consider what strategies to stop that reduction, at least, if not turn it around.
I thought I'd just add a comment on the multifamily use cycle, something that I tried in the past, and perhaps it would work, or maybe even you're doing it already. We actually advertised with the university multifamilies that were recycling, and somehow it added value to students looking for more sustainable living. Maybe you're doing that already.
So you're saying you promoted the buildings that had recycling versus those that in Urbana they're required to have recycling.
Right. So this is just a reduction amount. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I can't see of any other way. I mean, also this is scaled, and I can't imagine what else it would be.
Or maybe the big users. Maybe that would work.
It could be. One large apartment building that, if somebody destroyed a couple of their recycle cans and they never asked us for more, okay, well now they can only collect so much a week.
Mm-hmm.
That could be it. But it's something we're going to have to take a look at in the next year.
Right. If I may follow up with one, just my initial thought, and I think you already answered this to some extent. The first question looking through the table was, what are the commercial recyclers doing marketing-wise that the residential aren't? Is there a difference there, do you think, or is it just, do you think the difference in percentage gain is mostly attributed to the changes in measurements that you mentioned before?
Can you explain what you mean? What are the commercial recycling? What is the marketing for it? Is that what you're asking?
Right. Yeah. Just the promotion.
Okay.
Using the
Sure.
service.
So for multifamily, it's required, and there is a required tax for each individual rental unit that the property owner pays, the rent landlord. For commercial recycling, it's not required that any individual business participate in recycling or have recycling service. It is required that the commercial waste haulers all offer commercial recycling as well to their customers. And to that effect, in the ordinance, they're required to do an annual mailing advertising their recycling service. There's nothing in the ordinance that requires any particular pricing. So they can sub out the recycling that, say, their waste customer wants to another hauler, but it's not required. There's no mandatory commercial recycling. So I think that's probably the primary difference.
Okay, thank
And
you.
that's kind of the extent of what we're doing in terms of commercial recycling.
Other questions, comments? I guess I would just briefly note that, I guess, Scott, you're going to be on an ICLEI webinar about the ClearPath software, and I saw that Libby's going to be on a webinar regarding smart growth
Yeah.
initiatives in Urbana. So we're getting some, I don't know if webinar counts as, FaceTime publicity
Yeah.
outside of the community, so.
Yeah,
That's great to
ClearPath
know.
is the new ICLEI greenhouse gas accounting software. When they released that, I talked to the ICLEI folks, and I said I had not used the old one because the new one was coming out, and the old one looked really, outdated. And they said, actually, it's probably for the best that you never use the old one when you use the new one. The new tool is very thorough. It allows you to put in a lot of data that is not necessarily required, and allows you to have a lot of detail in your data that what you have available to you, you may not have, be able to utilize. So it takes a long time to navigate through. I think I have a complete 2007 baseline inventory. So I've redone our 2007 inventory because we have a new tool, methodology, and data is a little different. The electricity data and gas data that we get from Ameren is a completely novel data set. Whatever data set they provided to us years ago, I can't find it, Ameren can't find it. So we're kind of starting fresh with the same baseline year. The totals are somewhat different. It's not different enough that we would change our strategy, really. And now I'm presently working to inventory 2013 so we can see what our change is. So the inventory is just one part of the tool. The next is projections. So then I'll do projections. So based on population growth, all these are all things that we have to input. Here's where your greenhouse gas emissions are going. And then after projections, I will do planning, which is that scenarios effort that went into our first phase of our climate action plan, which is that's probably the most powerful piece of this tool. It's also complex and takes a lot of user input. So we're working on it.
Just following up on that, do we have the utility data now for the next round of analysis?
Yeah, I've got Ameren utility data every year, 2007 through 2013.
Okay. Well, I'd like to have a look at it with you sometime.
Yeah. And I'm happy to show off the greenhouse gas web-based tool to anyone. I guess 2 people or less, right? Unless we're in a meeting here. If we don't go too late tonight, I could show it tonight as well. But if it's 8:30, you all may not want to watch me click through a website. So.
Right. Well, one thing, just as I guess as a reminder, in an earlier meeting, I presented one method for weather normalized data analysis. To see how years might be the same, or how things might change on a year-by-year basis without having to worry about whether the weather was different or warmer or colder or whatever. So, anyways,
Great.
You may want to get a little, farther into your work on it, but I think it'd be great if at some point you could just give us a presentation, just to show us a little bit of, the difference between the previous baseline and what we have now.
Mm-hmm.
And so is Ameren, they're doing kind of a consistent way of calculating things between 2007 and now? Because I know there were some hiccups with the original plan because of our original efforts because of differences in data collection.
So all the utilities, not just Ameren and not just electric utilities, but all the utilities are set up to bill customers. That's how their data management systems are set up. Now all these cities are asking them to provide data in a completely different way, not individual customers one at a time, but entire cities. And what does the utility care about city boundaries, right? They've never thought about it because they provide electricity in entire regions. So for both Ameren and the water company, this is just happened for this current year for Illinois American. We asked for data, and we're kind of the only one, or there's only a couple cities that are doing it. So they tell somebody, "Hey, go get this data for them," and this person figures out a way to query their data sets and gives us the data. But they don't systematize that. That person retires. Nobody knows how it was done. And that is literally what's happened with Illinois American. They're working on it. They're trying to figure out, they're actually calling the person that retired, and how did you do this? Because they're trying to get us the same data they've provided in years past. So they're working on it. But this is the situation, is we're just changing the paradigm of data management for them.
Other questions, comments? All right, then let's move to our next item, continuing business, climate impacts and adaptation pursuant to Goal 4 of the Climate Action Plan. And tonight we have a presentation by Rick Manor, Executive Director of the Urbana-Champaign Sanitary District. Welcome.
Thank you. Presentation is probably a little overstatement. I'm just here to chat with you about what I know about it and answer any questions you have. And as I said before the meeting, I promise this time I'm not going to be here as long or talk as long as the time back in July when I was here earlier. In regards to climate change, let's ignore what the prognosticators say, whether it's colder, warmer, drier, wetter. Of those, drier or warmer really doesn't make wastewater treatment any harder at all. In fact, it makes it a little easier in some ways. Until you talk about some serious changes in that, as in us changing more to Saudi Arabia type weather, is when you actually see some really dramatic changes in wastewater treatment. But the difference between us and central Wisconsin or us and Kentucky is not terribly different with the technology that is most commonly used at wastewater treatment plants. If you were a lagoon-based system or something like that, that some small communities have, those do change. Over 100 miles difference matters. But with a typical aerobic wastewater treatment system that we're doing, it is the standard for anybody in a moderate climate. And so, again, warmer and drier, no influence at all. Colder is a little bit more difficult, but it's not tragically difficult, or not really that, it doesn't really change things terribly much. Wetter is the one that matters to us, that when things are wet, our work gets much more challenging, that we have extraneous flows that don't belong in the sanitary sewers but get in there anyways and dramatically increase our flow coming into our treatment plants during storm events. So that is a challenge, and the bigger the storm, the more intense the storm, the more of a challenge it is. However, in terms of the detail of climate change itself, even to the extent that when that is being discussed in the extremes of what you've heard before in terms of how bad things can get with regards to storms, if we do see a 20 or 30% increase in frequency of major storms, recognize that since we have to be prepared for any individual storm, the fact that there happen to be a few more in any given year doesn't really change our need to be prepared for storms generally. And also, what is helpful is the fact that we prepare for storms already, and then after every major storm, we sort of do a post-mortem, look at what happened, what went right, what went wrong, how can we do better. Since that's a natural part of our operations, there too, if we happen to have another 20% major storms, it just means we'll do that review more often. It doesn't fundamentally change our operations at all. That what we're doing today will take care of climate change things, because frankly the rate of change of climate change is slow relative to what we're already addressing. You know, the rate of population growth in Urbana and Champaign has been over a couple % a year regularly over the last decades, whereas the climate change issue is something that is going to change at maybe 1% a year for 40 or 50 years. But the population growth that we've seen is something we've handled, and that adds one level of noise, and then you add weather to it, but the change in weather is not really that much dramatic change relative to what's going on. To demonstrate a little bit of that, I've only been here 3 years, and I can tell you every one of the major storm events that we've experienced. That I can tell you in detail. Well, the first 2011, April 2011 was actually the month before I arrived here for work. You guys had rain on about 14 out of the 30 days. It was most wet towards the end of the month. Fortunately, I arrived in May and it stopped raining, so my job got easier relative to what Mike Little was needing to deal with during April. So I had a relatively boring introduction to the district in terms of major rain events. There really wasn't one for the rest of 2011. 2012 Labor Day weekend was Hurricane Isaac when it came to town, and first football game came to town that weekend, and we also had an interesting event going on underneath University Avenue in Urbana, all colliding together in that same weekend. Hurricane Isaac gave us 4 inches of rain on September 1st, September 2nd, and that was after there was already like about 2.5 inches of rain on August 26th. So we actually ended the drought quite dramatically with a good-sized storm on August 26th, and then Hurricane Isaac really kicked us hard. And so that was a real big challenge to us. And then this last year, April 18th was another major storm event where there was a lot of localized flooding, a lot of issues that presented to us. And so basically, that's what we do every year. That level of detail that I know, I can go backwards in my career back to 1996 when 15 inches of rain hit King County, because that's pretty dramatic, and you remember those things. So that's what we do in wastewater treatment. It's a standard of what we do. When you talk to a guy who's retiring for 30 years, when Dennis Stryker retired from Elmhurst, people asked him, what are you looking forward to? And he said, I can finally sleep through a rainstorm. Because that's exactly true, that we all wonder about it, and we listen for the intensity of the rain, and we try and look at antecedent moisture conditions in the soils, and we're evaluating and calculating how bad it's going to be and how entertaining it is at work, and whether we need to go into work at 2 in the morning because it's looking like it's a real hellacious rainstorm, and then we show up and deal with it. So the good news is climate change doesn't make that terribly much worse. We're already going to do it. So that's the extent of the presentation part. And you had the graph there of frequency of major storm events, and I was just pointing out that potentially, changing the number of over 1 inch rainstorm events from 5 to 7 versus 7 to 9, that happening over 50 years doesn't matter to us.
So I have to say, after that presentation, I'm like, bursting at the seams to find out, so what happens? You go into work at 2 in the morning. What are you looking at? I mean, your pipes deliver water at a certain rate.
Yep.
It's spraying out of the seams.
It can get that bad. We have additional equipment that can come online. We have a permit obligation that says we're supposed to treat the maximum practicable flow, in nice words out of NPDES discharge permits, through the main line of treatment. And we don't deviate from that until we've really pushed every last gallon that we can through that. When we've reached that point, our professional operators make the decision, okay, that's all that can go that route. And so we activate a new set of equipment that is designed to treat the more dilute flow that we're getting at that point in time. And that's termed our excess flow systems become activated at that point. They first fill up, and then eventually, if the storm continues for that many more hours, we're discharging through that. We also then continue to monitor the flow in the sewer system to try and make sure we can turn off that version of treatment as soon as possible, because again, we have the permit obligation to do as much as we can through the normal treatment. Also, our systems are generally designed around these largest storms, that our dry weather flow is rated at 17.3 million gallons a day. Our wet weather flow is rated at a daily average of more like, let me get this right, 54 million gallons a day. And so we already are ready so that we don't burst at the seams too quickly. And then instantaneous hours can actually be even greater than that. And We're also there to deal with power outages, which often occur during storm events, that, we need to, at that point in time, a power outage at a local pump station is something we need to get to there as soon as possible. Our major pump stations actually have local generators that turn on their own, but our smaller ones don't, and we have to drive a generator out to there or a pump system out to there. And so we need to be ready for that type of thing. And then basically also just to check what's going on, looking at places that are prone to sewer overflows or things like that. We'll go out and check our sewer system more intensively during storm events, et cetera.
So that was my other quick question. Is when you see flooded intersections, is the sanitary system interacting with that surface water in that situation? Does it become
very uncommonly, that for the most part, when you see a flooded roadway, it's almost all stormwater. The flooded stormwater may be leaking into the sanitary sewer system, but the number of times that a sanitary sewer is actually leaking outwards onto the surface is very rare, and that's called a sanitary sewer overflow, and it's a major event that we have to report to IEPA, et cetera. And so it's decently rare that just about any water that you see on the ground is obviously generally rainwater.
Other questions or comments?
Rick, can you talk about how stormwater gets into your system and what pipes you control and what pipes you don't control?
That's a leading question. And yes, I'm sorry, I should have already expected that and answered that for you. That all right, division of ownership of sanitary sewer systems. Going from the house, the homeowner owns obviously their house. They also own the sanitary sewer connection from their house all the way into the public sewer that is in the roadway or in their backyard, depending on where it is. If the house is on a north-south street, so they would own the east-west connection taking from their house going into the street. The north-south sewer running up and down the street that has more than one house of flow in it is a public sewer system, typically owned by the municipality involved, Urbana in this case. Urbana often owns those local sewers. They're typically 8 inches in diameter is the small end of residential sewers that Urbana would own. 15 inches is probably the maximum that Urbana owns as theirs. Eventually, enough of those 8-inch sewers, 10-inch sewers, 12-inch sewers all connect together, and you start to have a 24 or a 30-inch sewer. At that point, it's called an interceptor sewer because it's intercepted flow from so many different other sewers, and we own the interceptors. That's our division of labor, that you guys take care of the smaller sewers, we take care of the larger interceptors, and we bring it all the way to our treatment plant. If there's a need for a local pump station to pump the flow up from a deeper point in the ground back up higher, we typically own all of those pump stations across the district as well. That is an important issue. I know that Urbana was struggling with that in regards to homeowners not being happy with owning the private connection all the way out to the home or out to the public sewer, and in particular the fact that it's underneath the street in some cases, and it's not. And Urbana has a plan for dealing with that in terms of a cost sharing if there is a leak underneath the street. The reality is that most times underneath the street would be expensive to fix, but it's rare for a leak to generate from there because streets are stable. There aren't terribly many people ripping backhoes into sewers underneath streets because the street is expensive to repair. And most importantly, there aren't tree roots. Underneath streets, generally the trees grow in the parkway and they put their roots down there, but they don't bother putting their roots underneath cement because it doesn't really serve much purpose. And so most of the leaks are generated in the areas that are in green space areas. And so that's why it is not as burdensome as you might anticipate having the homeowner own that part across the street. It might be interesting for you to know that it's actually the Clean Water Act referenced what is the private ownership and what is the public ownership in regards to sanitary sewer system. That they were only willing to pay for public sewer construction, and they specified what's public and what was private. In terms of how does that impact storm events, is recognize this, is that we spend many hundreds of hours working on maintaining our interceptor sewers, and we spend several $100,000, upwards of over to $1 million sometimes, lining sewers, doing a lot of serious maintenance issues to the interceptors that we own. You contributing communities also spend millions of dollars per year maintaining your local sewers that you own, and lining is one of the high-tech things that we do, which helps take care of tree root issues. Homeowners, there aren't terribly many of them that are spending, even if you add up all the homeowners that have sanitary sewer issues, it's unlikely that it comes anywhere near hundreds of millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars in terms of total costs. And so when we're talking about leaky sewers, I know that we've looked and maintained and found as many as that we can, and I trust that our contributing communities are doing the same. I know the guys who are working on it, and they're also doing a very good and thorough job. Unfortunately, a leak that comes in on a private sewer connection is just as problematic as one that comes in on the public sewer section and causes us just as much headaches and hassles. And there really isn't a good mechanism to control that right now. There's been a lot of money spent on trying to eliminate extraneous flows going into sanitary sewer systems. And unfortunately, the best we're at is sort of a maintenance mode, that in a climate where we have 30 inches of rain, it is not uncommon for there to be substantial leakage into sanitary sewer systems. And we work like the dickens to try and keep it out, but we just basically stay even and eliminate major problem areas as they're discovered, but it's a continuous battle that is there. That back in the 70s when the Clean Water Act was first passed, there was a general theme of, well, you just need to do one project and you'll solve the sanitary sewer problem and the leakage. And so there were things called sanitary sewer evaluation studies, and they generated consultant studies this big, and okay, here it is, and here's the roadmap, and by 1985 you should solve all sanitary sewer leaks because we've done a project. And not at all true. We did a project, spent all the money, worked on it, did accomplish some leak control, but really still only just knocked off some of it. And that's why we're in the maintenance mode, and that's been recognized by US EPA. And now the acronym is called CMOM, which is Capacity Management and Maintenance Plans. And so it's a plan on how to keep steady. There is no mythical silver bullet to eliminate that.
So you may not be able to speak for the city side of sanitary sewer maintenance, but at least for the district, do you line sewers when you find a problem, or is it like there's a certain amount of money you spend on that every year and you're constantly lining?
A bit of both, and the cities are in the same format. Recognize that to target your work, you need to monitor. And so we actually do send a TV camera on a tractor down many miles of sanitary sewers, looking at what's going on and finding problem areas. And when you find a problem area, you evaluate how urgent that problem is, and if necessary, you immediately address it, or you score it and say, well, it can wait for 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, whatever. And you evaluate what's going on. In addition to that, one of the things that gives you better TV resolution is cleaning the sewers. And so there's a jetting equipment that also runs down sanitary sewers and cleans them out before you do good televising. It also can have a root saw on it to cut tree roots, so that if tree roots are starting to clog or cause a problem in a sanitary sewer, you can actually cut them out and clean them out, and then again run a camera through it, see what's going on. And then, as you were saying, lining is the next level of maintenance, that if you have serious cracks, holes, et cetera, or just massive roots coming in multiple joints, one after the other that you have tree roots on, you will actually put a plastic liner on the inside of the sewer and attach it to the wall on the inside of the sewer. Really high-tech stuff, really cool. And if you ever want to get into sewer maintenance, I can talk to you. Then I can talk to you for hours about it. But anyways, you line it from the inside, and with that you have what is a more permanent solution in regards to what's going on from tree roots. And where a tree root is coming in, you've also got essentially a route for rainwater to come in. And so that's where those types of things are a problem, because the tree root gets big enough so that it can get in, but then water can pour in right next to it. And so where we see a lot of roots, we're very concerned for what's going on. But there too, if you've lined all of your sewers and you fixed it so that it's absolutely tight on the public end, it means that water can't come in here, and so the groundwater goes up a few more inches, and then it finds a hole in a private sewer connection, and it just flows through that hole a little faster. And so that's the problem and the quandary in regards to sanitary sewer maintenance issues, that solving 50%, 80%, or 90% of the leaks often doesn't do much, because the 10% that are left still provide an awful lot of a problem. And then in addition to that, there's other legacy issues, that if somebody built a home in the 50s with a footer drain, and the footer drain has a connection going to the sanitary sewer because there was no storm sewer in the area, that's never going to stop. And so every time there's a major rainstorm event, that footer drain could be draining into the sanitary sewer system. And back then it was a feature. It was an asset to the home. The home didn't flood as much. It was drier around the house. And nobody knows about it, and nobody's going to undo it, because it's always been that dry around this house. Even when it rains, it's always dry, right? And so there's features like that, and that's how much mystery there is under the ground. And it all flows to us.
Do those footer drains get disconnected when, say, a pipe is being replaced in that area?
You'd hope so. But there too, if you're a plumber and you see a pipe coming into the side of a sewer, and it was previously connected to the old sanitary sewer, what's the probability you're not going to reconnect it? Or that you're going to spend hours investigating, figuring out what's going on, because that pipe may still have somebody's washing machine hooked up to it onto the far end of it. It may do, it may be a perforated pipe most of the length and act as a footer drain, but somebody decided to use it also for a drain. So what's underground is unseen and causes problems.
So in terms of, that total number of, or amount of pipe that you have, which is an increasing number, does the sewer lining, is that increasing faster than the rate of total pipe that you have? Like, is there a point in the future where everything gets the plastic liner? It's unlikely, just because it is quite expensive, that it's almost as costly to put in a brand new sewer as it is to line it. That both of them are in the $50 to a couple $100 a foot range. And then when you add how many miles of sewers there are, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars to rebuild things, which is about the value of the sanitary sewer system, is a couple $100 million as well. And so when I mentioned we're spending a lot, and collectively communities, Urbana, Champaign, University, Savoy, are spending upwards of $3 to $5 million. That still takes a long time to get around to spending a couple $100 million in regards to what's going on. And frankly, you don't necessarily need to have every bit lined. That solving the structural issues is a significant thing. Finding the problem areas is a significant thing. But for all of the miles that are structurally sound, and in particular ones under pavement, we've got 100-year-old sewer that I'm not the least bit interested in lining right now, because it's fine. It's in good shape. We've televised it. We've looked at it. It's in very good shape. And so there may not be an urgency, and that urgency may never rise to the top to need it. But I'm not sure. Right now I've got enough crocodiles that are biting at me that I've got a long list of areas that are pretty urgently needed. Sure. That I'd like to get lined. And so there is a practicality of how much money can I spend on that in any given year.
And so I think that all the communities are in that same boat of, well, we'll get to that, and we'll deal with the real big emergencies. But in terms of the ones that are more problematic but somewhat stable, we'll get them as we can and as we can afford them.
You've described that the part of the problem that isn't really addressed is the individually owned pipe from the house to the street. And you mentioned that that's specified in the Clean Water Act. Is that how most communities are in Illinois? Is
Yeah.
anyone different? Is anyone doing something different?
It is generally the most common definition is exactly that. It's one that I always saw applied, and so actually I started to look into this once, partly because of the newspaper articles in regards to what Urbana was doing, and I stumbled across this reference, and I said, so that's why everybody decided that, because it seems somewhat strange that so many communities, and every community that I've worked at, uses that as the split. And especially the part going underneath the pavement seems rather strange. But then you find out, well, sometimes there was one arbitrary decision, and when that was a significant authority, being US EPA, and when they had the purse strings for funding major infrastructure improvements, they said, thou shalt define it this way, and we generally did. So that's by far the most common. There is also a side issue in regards to equity, and I shouldn't line the mayors, and I shouldn't have used any particular reference, but I shouldn't line any particular influential person's sewer in place of everybody else's. So it should be everybody gets the exact same deal. And so we've had so many history of this, and there's so much legislative direction away from treating people special that I am hesitant to we're going to change to something that's different, because what about the person who just fixed their sewer line and spent thousands of dollars fixing their individual sewer line? Mm-hmm. And so in general, the most that any place does is develop a cost-sharing program like
Mm-hmm.
you have. That is pretty common. It's not universal that there's a cost sharing, and the exact percentages are prone to change, and you guys, I think, did actually undergo some changes in regards to that. There are a couple communities that are toying with ideas on how to perhaps do more. Mm-hmm. I don't know how successful they've been yet, and I haven't heard anybody that's absolutely solved this problem, and it is one that the industry is looking at, and when somebody gets a real good silver bullet, I think it will spread like wildfire in terms of the knowledge of that. But I haven't heard of it yet. And so we're sort of stuck with the idea of we shouldn't have any selective enforcement of who gets anything more fancy treatment or something like that. And so we generally, I joke about it, and it is a joke that I treat everybody equally bad. And that is my standard, is to make sure that I don't give any favoritism to anybody, and so by that I want to make sure that we treat everybody the same as much as possible. Does
anyone else want to ask? So, $3 to $5 million a year, and the city's making a comparable investment.
That's actually the sum of the communities, is the $3 to $5 million. That's not us, just.
Sure.
So.
And so is this maintenance, is it primarily about like permit compliance and performance, or are you actually avoiding costs with these investments associated with the inflow, or is it mostly about basically attaining a performance level? And I'm just curious whether that expenditure, when you describe the ownership and the potential source of the problem, if you've exceeded your marginal benefit by continuing to improve what you can control. And I understand the equity barrier,
right, but
I also wonder, is it a point where, well, gosh, our dollar's going to go 4 times farther if we just start improving the other side of the boundary. And so I'm just curious about that.
And that's what I'd say some of the other communities that are on the leading edge of this are struggling with and challenged with. Right now, it appears that I think we are looking at and addressing serious enough problems that I don't anticipate deviating from it much. At the same time, we are making serious progress as well, that the worst neighborhoods that I want addressed are getting addressed. And so we are perhaps getting to the point where it might be diminishing returns to go much further. And it certainly does make sense that, yeah, completely ignoring one potential source is a very poor policy generally. But actually, there have been a lot of technological changes that if I were here speaking in the 1980s, I would be talking about. There's this really untested technology called lining. I don't want to spend the money on it because I've heard too many horror stories about it where the lining was put in and then major storm came along and the lining collapsed back in, and now you've got a liner on the inside of your sewer causing a blockage of the sewer that has got sanitary sewage in it. So we've moved a lot on that, and there are some really high-tech gizmos that not only line this line, but also line 30 feet up an individual service connection, which is pretty cool. Unfortunately, each one of those, each launch going sideways is $2,000 to $3,000 just to get that 30 feet. And so, do you really, is that so necessary? Is that a good cost thing? And so we monitor the technology as well. That one of my jobs and our staff's job is to monitor what is good and reasonable technology, and so we look at that as well. I'm sorry, I didn't answer your first question in terms of are we getting more than just maintaining, and that's yes. That we do need to keep this under control because if our flows go up much worse, we need to build more equipment to handle the higher spikes. And so that's the cost benefit that we're getting at is, and those 1970 studies, those sanitary sewer evaluation studies, were exactly at looking at that balance of how much should we spend on reducing flows versus how much should we expend on expanding treatment capacity. And so we do that cost-benefit analysis looking at that. But recognize there's a good deal of uncertainty there because we don't know how effective any individual dollar spent in the sanitary sewer system is. And so that puts a big question mark on that cost-benefit analysis. And that's why there has been a tendency to invest in infrastructure at the treatment plant, because that you know what you're getting for your money. And so it's a dynamic, and that's what we pay high-priced consultants to evaluate that as best they can, and we use their expertise.
Thank you. Rick, I just have a question, and I kind of touched on it maybe before the meeting tonight, but I'm just curious as far as the adaptations cost long-term and your costs of improving infrastructure over time. Do you think, given that the homeowners are quite passionate, I think, about trying to capture some of this valuable water themselves and hold on to it as we go, whether it be rain barrels or bioswales or green roofs, what have you, do you see that expenditure on the private level actually benefiting you in the long run as far as what infrastructure improvements you're going to have to make?
Right. We talked about this briefly before the meeting, and so I'll get back to that same answer, and that is that green infrastructure, similar to cutting-edge lining technology back in the 1980s, is a good concept, a concept we need to research further, but it is very unproven in terms of the actual impact that it has. And in particular for us and for me as a wastewater treatment plant operator, I need that green infrastructure to perform on the last storm as well as the first storm. And unfortunately, the vast majority of green infrastructure, you deploy all of the rain barrels you want, and the first storm usually fills them up. And I still need to treat whatever comes to us and whatever overflows from those rain barrels at the end of the last storm. And so that challenge is very difficult for green infrastructure to fill in. Bioswales have some advantage, and some ability as well, except just about all of the other aspects of green infrastructure really have great difficulty performing in frozen ground conditions. And that is actually, people think that, and a lot of major storms are really challenging when you picture 3-inch rainstorms that we see in August and such. Frankly, a 2-inch rainstorm in February on top of frozen ground when there's already 6 inches of snow on the ground is my biggest nightmare. Because all of that means that everything is essentially pavement. And so there's all this extra water, and it's all sitting on top of everything, and it's all finding a way to get out of there, and a lot of it is causing us great difficulties. And so just about all of that green infrastructure ain't doing a heck of a lot for us during those times. That being said, as we said, this is cutting-edge research. There are a lot of communities that are investing substantial dollars in green infrastructure, including some in northern climates. It's absolutely a very good idea in more temperate climates. But as the example we were talking about, Philadelphia is investing, I believe it's $600 million into green infrastructure ideas. And so it is something that we as a nation and US EPA is emphasizing, similar to climate change preparedness, that they are still pushing the envelope, looking at these types of things. But frankly, for us to invest a massive amount of money is unlikely to be worthwhile, because I don't know enough, and I don't think that anybody knows for sure what's a good investment in regards to that. Somebody has to do that research, but it's very expensive research to do, and it helps if US EPA is funding that. That's not to say that there isn't the advantage of getting people involved, rain barrels, and you know, I'm planning on a wetland garden, and we already have a couple of rain barrels around our house and everything like that. That's still all good.
Maybe Scott's new meters will help.
Right. And I mean, all of those things are cumulative and beneficial generally, so they're the right trend, but it's not something that I can really rely on to be there in the next April 18th storm, for example. That it's not there yet.
Other questions?
So you're just talking about, you know, some green infrastructure and some, like, an unproven technology and a need for research. Yeah. So I'm wondering, throughout the district, we have a number of different communities, a lot of, you know, many miles of piping. We have a lot of different neighborhood types, a lot of different, say, in a neighborhood, predominant, say, presence of vegetation or lack of. Do you think, and I understand there's a lot of variables with age of piping and all of that kind of stuff, but I wonder if we have in the district the potential for a controlled experiment to look at some of those things that you're talking about.
There is a potential for it, but the priority isn't there, frankly. That
Sure.
We've got a number of research avenues to investigate, and I need to make a decision about what makes the most sense for us as a district, and frankly, I'm pushing a lot more of things in terms of energy efficiency, biogas production, and things like that, that I see more certainty in regards to return on investment. And so we're pushing our envelope in that area.
Sure.
Because that's basically our staff's evaluation of what makes sense for Urbana-Champaign Sanitary District.
Right.
So
the point was not to suggest that you should be doing that
Right.
research, but you know, I mean, so you mentioned here we are in a town with a big university, lots
Yes.
of people doing research, and so just you know, if somebody were to wander along that line of research
Yes.
after some more thought, you
Right.
know, is that I'm just curious how that strikes you.
It's entirely an option. We do work collaboratively with the university on whatever research fancies they come up with that they think that the sanitary district could help them on. We have a variety of those that we touch base with and support to the extent that we can. And so we've been involved in everything from algae treatment of sewage to whatever. You know, I mean, The research institution of the University of Illinois is real and great, and it excels in environmental engineering, so we do try to work with them as much as possible. And so if we had a researcher who wanted to look in particular at sanitary sewer flows, I'd absolutely be on board with working with them on that. Right now, there's been a lot of other interesting research that's been going on. And by the way, the activated sludge process that is the mainstay of the world's wastewater treatment goes back to the University of Illinois, 1917 or so. The research was done here I'm sorry, correction. I think it was 1897. Some of that research was done here. So yeah, we're there. The university is a part of it. And so we just need to make that connection, and because I can't do that level of
Sure.
high-end research is not what the sanitary district was created for. But partnering with the university, we're absolutely on board with that.
Okay. I wanted to go back to another line of discussion that we had a little bit earlier, and so that was kind of getting to Scott kind of was leading into what are some of the sources of stormwater infiltration into the system. And so, from your comments, it was sounding like a significant portion of that is on, private green spaces. Any idea on percentage, or just, too hard to?
Way too hard.
Yeah. I don't want to push you for a number if it's not.
I can give you, there is a simplified number that what I see at treatment plants and what I have historically seen over my 25-year career in wastewater treatment, that in the Midwest, that a sewer system that is as leaky as standard because it's been built like ours has over a 100-year time period, that we will see anywhere from 3 to 5 times dry weather flow at the worst moments in storm events. So at its worst, when the rain is coming down at its worst and such, that we will actually see triple and quadruple flow is not uncommon at all at treatment plants. When that ratio goes beyond 3 and 5 to 1, or if it goes 2, 3 to 5 to 1 for minor storms, more minor storms, at that point I would say that you have some low-hanging fruit that you should be out there looking for, that something's going on weird in your sewer system. Mm-hmm. That there, for example, we've got, I don't know how many thousands of manhole covers that, just after the April 18th rainstorm in 2013, it was uncovered that there was a manhole cover that was bent at 45-degree angle and next to a farmer's field, and the farmer's field was obviously draining towards this end. And so during the flood, that was probably, that was a small river of water was perhaps going into that sewer because it was a really large sewer system there. And that helped explain some of our problems that we saw during that storm event. And so we're looking for those types of things too. Mm-hmm. And we did actually exceed that rule of thumb of 3 to 5 times at the Southwest plant, which is what was fed by that. And so I wasn't shocked that we found something like that out there. There's not really a good way to completely prevent that because of the thousands of access points that you have out there. Construction is another big worry that, if somebody knocks a backhoe into something or another and causes a significant crack, pushes a manhole that is, a nice tall tube and pushes the top of it off 6 inches, it still looks flat to the rest of the world. But then during a rainstorm, it starts to leak next to it and pours down on that side. Things like that happen all the time too. So there's a lot of oddball events that are out there, even with a relatively normal leaking system. You have these weird events that you can find and need to uncover and so you look at what's going on. Again, that post-mortem after every storm. Was this storm different from another one? Did it come down sanitary sewer A versus B versus C? Which one of those was worse? Well, A is always our problem one, and this last storm C was our problem. Well, we really are going to look at what's going on down C in that case. And so that's just the continuous maintenance operation that goes on.
Right. So you have ways of tracing how much flows approximately are coming from different locations in the system?
There aren't that many sewer meters out there in the system, but there are pump stations, and so we have how
Okay.
much an individual pump station ran during one storm versus another. So we have that access. Frankly, where an overflow event happens, we get a report from Urbana that there's a problem on such and such street. Well, if that same problem occurs every storm, well, we'll certainly be looking into what's going on there. We'll especially look into it if it's the first time, if such and such street is never a problem before. We're really interested in what's going on there. And so that's part of the whole stepwise process that goes on. So you take all the information that you can. You try and improve the information that you're getting. We are looking at improving our metering technology all the time because that is very useful for that evaluation.
Right. And so you mentioned that, you are very clear that you don't want to be in a position of, so with regard to the private side of the sanitary sewer, very clear you want to avoid impressions of favoritism or choosing people, treating everyone equally. So I understand that, but I also wonder if there's, and so maybe this is more of a policy question at a community level, but if the district identifies certain portions of the district or neighborhoods where, okay, there's a whole bunch of private green area where we think there's a lot of leakage, and if we made some collective, if we were enabled through policy to have some kind of a process to address this through whatever means, whether it's a collective, public, private, whatever arrangement there is so I know that you are required to act under certain policies, and so maybe that is beyond. But I guess if you could comment on, that sort of a policy approach where we collectively address, problematic private areas.
Right. That is exactly the time when there is the most likelihood that you would vary from that idea, and if you're treating an entire neighborhood, it is different from treating an individual. And so that certainly makes sense as a time to seriously investigate is there a greater policy advantage is there a greater advantage to the overall district to address this system uniquely? And when it is a neighborhood-wide problem, that's the time that it makes sense to really investigate whether you can find something or other. And I have seen communities look at doing things where they do a particular project in a neighborhood and figure out a way to get it done in that individual area. And that's where it might even be worthwhile to spend a couple $1,000s per household when you add up the flows that could be coming from a really wet, soupy area regularly, if they're every year during a storm, causing massive costs. And then also all of that flow needs to manage to make it all the way to the treatment plant. If it is overflow, if it is flowing in so fast that you're looking at the added expense of expanding a sewer pipe for a couple miles because of that added burden, that starts to really push the cost-benefit analysis towards acting on the source. And so you're right that you've identified exactly the type of circumstance where you look at it, but it would be neighborhood-wise. It wouldn't be one home having a particular backup because they've got trees in their yard and those trees are getting into the sanitary sewer, or that home has a particularly poorly constructed service connection. That's the type of thing where, frankly, the cost share program that the communities have really steps up as being the most reasonable method of, it's your house, it's your service connection, the city is willing to contribute some dollars towards it, and we actually contribute towards that same program that the sanitary district recognizes, and we've got a cost sharing where we contribute towards that same fixing of overhead sewers. In particular, Urbana pays something, we pay something, and then over in Champaign we also have the same deal. And so that's where you do look at those types of things. But cost sharing, to me, just seems to make more sense.
Mhm. Do you have any evidence of or indication that, there might be, so I'm not saying that there are because I don't know, but do you have evidence that there might be neighborhoods in the district where this kind of approach might be, where maybe some policy could be helpful in addressing neighborhood-wide hotspots?
I don't know of any particular neighborhoods with that as an issue.
Mhm.
No.
Okay.
Right now, it is not that common of a problem.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, other comments?
Okay.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Okay. And let's move to hearing from Bart about household hazardous waste collection in East Central Illinois.
Well, thanks very much. Thanks for the time. I was kind of hoping to talk tonight. Like I said, I guess I'm fortunate that maybe somebody couldn't make it tonight. But I do want to tell you about a project that we're working on right now, and if I may, just for a second, put a different hat on, because I've got a job that I'm working on with Champaign County Regional Planning Commission through the Illinois Sustainable Technology Center. And that project is to identify more efficient ways of collecting household hazardous waste in East Central Illinois. The project actually started, it's a 3-phase project. I'm involved in the second phase, but the first phase started January of 2013. That phase ran for about 6 or 7 months, identifying basically what exists in our area. And through that project, we noticed that, well, first of all, there's a big demand as far as residents go to do something with household hazardous waste. I know Scott probably gets as many calls as anybody calling in wondering, what do we do with this stuff, right? Pesticides, insecticides, pharmaceuticals perhaps. What do we do with this stuff? So that's what we were looking at. And in our state, there are 4 permanent household hazardous waste facilities, but they're all north of Naperville. So down in this area, we tend to rely on one-day collections provided by the IEPA. But due to lack of funding in recent years, there were 6 one-day collections in the state last year. We were fortunate enough, Champaign County was fortunate enough to have a one-day collection in 2012. Coles County had one in 2013. But the other counties in East Central Illinois in this study, the seven counties that are south and east of us, for the most part haven't had a collection in 10 years. So this material's been piling up. So we're starting to investigate, all right, what can we do about it? Given the lack of funding, given the necessity, we know there's a big demand out there because at the Champaign County collection, it served about 2,200 households. In that one event, provided some pretty long lines. And cost-wise, it may not be the most efficient way to go because that event in itself, between the costs from the IEPA and the members around here that put it on, ran around $140,000 for that day. So through, Phase 2 is not going to be done for another couple months, but I think I can share some of our findings thus far. And that would be, there would be a lot of interest in having a permanent facility in this region. A permanent facility, for instance, we found cost about the same as a one-day event to put one up. And as far as staffing that over time, the cost of staffing it for a year based on a 10-day work week, which the IEPA recommends, so just open 10 days a week, staffing that facility's also, I'm sorry, 10 hours a week. Yes, not 10 days a week. Good, thanks for pointing that out. That would be a long week, yeah. 10 hours a week. And on 10 hours a week, it also, cost-wise, would cost about the same as a one-day event. I'm talking about funding it for the whole year, being the equivalent of staff for one day, on a one-day event. So I'm looking into more of these options, and I've been tasked to come up with at least 3 different alternatives for this region, and then roll those out in the next couple months. Phase 3 then would share that with everybody in the 7-county region, get some feedback, and try to push forth with one of those, whatever seems to be the most popular option going forward, and then trying to implement that by 2015. So that's kind of where we stand right now. We are still in the public input phase. So I'm happy tonight to share this and take any feedback that you might provide, given that we are looking for, of course, funding options, site options, where this might be located, and also trying to piece together collaborative efforts, because we have had conversations, public presentations for the 7 counties involved. Everywhere I go, they say, we definitely need this. And everywhere we go, but we don't have the money for it. And so individually, I see it's something that maybe just isn't going to happen. But together, collaboratively, maybe we can put something together. And given the budget constraints, I have been looking at minimum standard scenarios. What is the least amount of money that we could put together to create a permanent facility? And operationally, what would be the minimum to keep it running and still provide adequate services for the citizens in this area? You look like you got a question. I do. Okay, fire away.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I guess they're really obvious, and if you can address them quickly, that'd be good, if you know them. Well, one is just what does a facility like this typically look like? Just scope it out, frame it out, and what are the flows, like how much stuff is stockpiled, and then when it's moved away, where is it going to? And have you thought about in terms of, or do you have an estimate in terms of the anticipated volume? I'm assuming this is like a drop-off facility. People come, use on demand. What kind of a revenue stream? If people were, hey, here's $5, here's, a laundry basket full of old spray paint cans, what kind of revenue stream is required to keep it going?
Very good questions. Yeah, I've got a few answers for you. As far as a facility, what does it look like? That is normally the first question, and there's a wide range out there, I can tell you that. There's a couple $1 million being spent on facilities in Goose Island and in Gurnee, versus something that may be more along the lines of what I would envision here being put forth in Rockford. The Rockford Water Reclamation District, out of necessity, perhaps, put together an HHW facility there. And really, at that site, it's really a trailer, fenced in, and a chemical storage locker. Storage locker being the most expensive part of that site. One locker, 40 feet long, costs about $47,000. So for that, it's a shipping container, but it's a fire rated for a 2-hour fire, if that makes sense to you, and broken up with dry chemical in one of the segments. So that's kind of, it's kind of both ends of the spectrum as far as what the facility would look like. As far as flow goes, SWOLCO managed to do something, and actually Naperville has done it as well. Nobody wants to see a 2-hour line of cars backed up someplace. So those facilities have gone to a reservation system. So, for instance, every 10 minutes, they have an online reservation where people can sign up to drop off at that. And by doing the online reservation, the facilities are able to reduce their staff, minimize their staff. So one of these facilities could be run with 3 members there, a chemist and 2 facilitators greeting and pulling stuff out of cars, and then an administrator that for 100 hours a year to put together the bookkeeping and the reports to the IEPA. And that seems to be quite efficient. Maybe it doesn't cover everybody, but it does give 3,000 cars a year a chance to drop stuff off. So for those that are really interested, there'll be something available in those 3,000 cars. As far as revenue goes, a few items I'm looking into there, and of course that's the big deal. How can we get this thing to a sustainable level where it actually maybe even pays for itself? I'm not sure we can get to that level, but St. Louis, for instance, has quite an attractive model in that they allow the first 50 pounds of HHW to be dropped off for free. Above that, they charge $1 a pound. And one thing that usually happens at an HHW collection is people come in with latex paint, which isn't household hazardous waste. So there's sometimes a confrontation about what do you accept that or send them away when they may very well dispose of it improperly if you send it away. So in St. Louis, they've decided to accept the latex paint for 20 cents a pound right away. So that's always, it's not necessarily a revenue generator, but it does get it out of the system, and 20 cents is the amount that they pay a vendor to take it away, and a recycler. So that kind of covers that, and it continues to bring the cost down. In addition to that, McLean County has run HHW collections. They set up a 501c3 to do so, and then they can have a donation box right at the drop-off site. They ended up getting about a little under $11 a car in donations when they did that. So between the donations, I'm not saying we could get $11 a car, by the way, especially if we were charging for some of the stuff. They got $11 because they had a big promotional campaign to raise funds to do this. So I think that had something to do with it. But I think, there'll be some money there. Even if it's $5 a car, that would go a long way to actually paying the 36 grand in staff costs to run a facility for the year. So between the donations, possibly running a fee structure like St. Louis, and then the 501c3 would also allow donations from foundations or wherever to help keep it running as well. That's kind of it in a nutshell.
Bart, the latex paint, if it's dry, it's not household hazardous waste, or it's not hazardous waste, but if it's wet, it is, isn't it? Isn't that
right? The model, the recommendation that's usually folded out is yes, let it dry. Some say throw some cat litter in it. Some say, that kind of thing. But in the meantime, there's some interest. There's some competitive interest to all of a sudden obtain latex paint. Mm-hmm. There's a recycler out of Minnesota. There's also 2 or 3 companies now in the Chicago area that are paint recyclers, and so they also recycle the cans and the buckets. So, we can probably make a bigger dent as far as environmental impact going with a recycler than having somebody take it home, dry it out, spend the money and so forth to dry it out, when the cost of recycling would be cheaper.
Have you separated out the cost of paint intake at HHW facilities in anticipation that we may get the paint care legislation at the state level, which would take care of that?
Yeah.
How much does that change the cost?
We're looking at that. The last conversations I had with lobbyists on the paint initiative, it doesn't sound likely that it's going to go through. So I'm not counting on that. If it does, great. The way I look at it, St. Louis, when they ran this fee structure, 55% of the product coming in was latex paint. I'm thinking if that doesn't come in, that's not a problem. Great, take it away. But so I've kind of looked at it at it both ways. If we need to take it, thinking about that aspect. If we don't have to take it, yeah, then great, we can maybe focus on something else, like maybe e-waste and something like that. Anybody else? No? Thanks.
I have, so I'm wondering, so another question about flow is, so the material comes in and it has to go out somewhere. And so Central Illinois, where are those locations? Where are those end destinations?
The one-day collections by the IEPA are run with a contractor. So, for instance, Clean Harbors, or there are a couple other vendors that do that. At this point, there is not available funding for the processing side of HHW. It is it's my hope that by showing a more efficient, more cost-effective way of collecting HHW, that funds will be freed up to add on additional processing by the IEPA, and then they would take care of that. It's not a given, but there are 3 or 4 different pushes right now, including the PAINT initiative, to add funding to HHW collection. So I think there'll be additional funding coming forth, but in and of itself, I think a conversation, just showing the model to the IEPA, if we take a systems approach and look at us as the state as one system, if we come up with a way of reducing costs for us as a whole, I think it would be a pretty attractive item to be involved in from the IEPA for them to support.
And then you also talked about a multi-county region. Was it 5 or 7 counties?
Right, 7 counties. I don't think I mentioned them, but Douglas, Coles County, Cumberland, Clark, Edgar, and Vermilion.
And are you modeling are you talking about scenarios of, say, one facility for all of those counties, and how far would people travel where it's a useful thing? And maybe there's already some intelligence on that because we have these one-day collection events where we maybe get information on where people are coming from.
Right. No, you're right. Phase 1 of the report identified 15 miles as being the maximum that somebody would be willing to travel on average to drop off HHW. So I'm not necessarily promoting one area over another in the 7 counties. What I'd like, one scenario that I'm looking at right now is one permanent facility in the 7 counties and possibly what are called satellite pickups in the other high populated areas. So the 2 other populated areas would be, of course, Danville and Mattoon or Charleston. Right. So somehow getting a facility in one of those 3 spots and do satellite pickups in the other 2, that's one scenario that I'm looking at.
Thanks.
Other questions, comments?
No.
All right, well, thank you very much. And
Thanks.
can I make the bold assumption that you might want to address this again on this issue going forward?
Hopefully.
Okay,
Hopefully.
good. I'll
Thanks.
just say when and we'll get you on the agenda. Okay. All right. Let's move on to new business, and we have none before us. So let's go to our announcements. Are there any announcements this evening?
I've got a couple. There is a hearing date set by US EPA regarding sole source aquifer petition. I think what's interesting to note is this isn't a hearing for people to make public comment as to whether we should or shouldn't have sole source aquifer, but rather it's to make public comment on US EPA's proposed approval of our sole source aquifer petition. So I think that's remarkable. I encourage everyone to go and share their opinion with US EPA. There will be a Champaign hearing Tuesday, May 13th. It's at the Hilton Garden Inn. There is an informational meeting at 6:30 before the hearing at 7:30. Also, there is an Illinois River Watch training coming up. That's going to be Saturday, April 12th. It's from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. at Lake of the Woods Forest Preserve. This trains folks to be volunteer river watchers. Essentially, you can learn how to take a sample, analyze, do basic macroinvertebrate analysis, and then you can, in the future, take samples from specified locations, do analysis, and submit the results to Illinois River Watch. I've signed up for this. I encourage other people to, and have an eye towards some of the public engagement that we've laid out in the Sustainable Water Management Plan. I think this is an opportunity to maybe get folks involved in that citizen scientist aspect.
Scott, with the Illinois EPA hearing, are they
Yes.
looking just for comments from individuals, or would it make sense for this body to take up something at our next meeting to forward a statement to them?
I don't know the answer to that. I suspect that any body can make a public comment as well as an individual.
Okay. Would folks be interested in having that on our May agenda? Okay.
Yes.
No problem with that. Are there other announcements tonight?
The Sierra Club is having an Earth Day happy hour, but I forget where. I'm sorry? Escobar's? And I know Scott is speaking there, I believe.
Yeah, I mentioned that in the staff report. Let's see if I put the date in there.
Yeah, but
22nd, it's Earth Day.
I'm in the place, but yes. So,
Escobar's in the evening.
From 5:30 to 7:30.
thereabouts.
Okay, I have an announcement I'd like to make too. As I think most of you are probably aware, the city arborist had to make the difficult call to remove, for safety reasons, the largest tree in the city of Urbana this past winter, and that was that large hackberry at High Street and Kohler Avenue. While it stood, it was briefly a contender for state champion of its species, and it's been made the city's first legacy tree under the Legacy Tree Program. Mike informs me that his office is accepting donations towards the memorialization of this tree. That's a priority of his and of many people who helped publicize the tree's plight and got a second opinion, and we worked with the Tree Commission and had a very healthy public exchange on its fate, and it was a good learning experience for everyone and has helped jumpstart and kick off the city's Legacy Tree Program citywide. But donations that are sent to the city, made out to the city of Urbana with either Legacy Tree or Sim Hackberry on the check will go into the fund towards the memorial. And Mike's explained to me that public contributions to that fund are really important at this time and are very timely. So I wanted to make that announcement.
Other announcements? All right. Seeing none and seeing no other business before us, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
I second.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, we're adjourned.